I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. In 2015, Isi Leibler received an honorary doctorate degree from Bar-Ilan University in Ramat Gan, Israel. The award culminated more than 5 decades of advocacy for the most significant causes affecting Israel and Jews worldwide. His efforts range from assisting Soviet Jews as early as 1962 to speaking and organizing against the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. Hello. And thank you for joining me today on Focus on Israel. I'm Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and sharing the message of Christian biblical responsibility to the people and land of Israel in the face of a growing global anti-Semitism. PJTN was birthed to stop the silence and alert Christians and all people of conscience to the reality of a world set on destroying Israel and the Jewish people. Since 2005, PJTN has fought against this hate and will always resist those who come against the plan of God. In our program today, we'll hear from a true Jewish hero in the years following the Holocaust. Born in Antwerp, Belgium in 1934, he arrived in Melbourne, Australia with his parents in 1939. Liebler was a highly articulate and charismatic leader of the Australian Jewish community for 25 years, from the late 1970s until his retirement in 1995. During his time, he was significant in maintaining Australia's strong pro-Israel stance at the United Nations and other international bodies. Dr. Liebler is perhaps best known for his work on behalf of Soviet Jewry, making many trips to the Soviet Union on behalf of the refuseniks, a movement of Soviet Jews who were refused permission to emigrate to Israel. In 1962, he created a public campaign which resulted in Australia being the first nation to speak out at the UN about the plight of Soviet Jews. During the 1960s and early 70s, he made regular flights to the Soviet Union to bring material support to Russian Jews who lost their jobs because they applied for immigration. In 1980, he was arrested, deported, and forbidden to return to the Soviet Union. However, during the Gorbachev era, Liebler was invited to return and opened the Solomon Mikhail Center in Moscow in 1987, the first free Jewish institution in Russia since the 1920s. Isi's doctorate conferment at Bar-Ilan University in 2015 was a fitting salute to his life and recognition of his many achievements for the State of Israel and the Jewish people.
I'm very thrilled to be here. It's a very special evening. To me, Bar-Ilan represents my hashkafa, and to be honored in this way by the university, which represents Torah Mada, Eretz Yisrael, and everything that I hold close, is a wonderful feeling. It's also a big zechut to be together with such a distinguished group of honorees, and I feel very much honored.
Bar-Ilan University bestows an honorary doctorate upon Isi Leibler, an ardent advocate of the State of Israel and a world statesman, in recognition of his tireless efforts to address the challenges facing the Jewish nation at every historic crossroad, from Soviet Jewry to BDS. Liebler's extensive and unique Judaic library collection, which he has generously donated to the university, demonstrates his reverence for Jewish sources and commitment to our heritage as the people of the book.
I believe that Bar-Ilan, in a sense, represents the future of modern Orthodoxy in Israel, because Bar-Ilan will prevent this country from polarizing between Chilonim and Haredim. An enlightened Torah U'Mad'a, which it stands for, is what I've been brought up to look towards in Jewish life. And our Jewish way of life is reflected in Jewish civilization in the published book. Books, to me, are the essence of life. I'm very glad that it's going to an institution like Bar-Ilan, because Bar-Ilan epitomizes for me what I would like to see Israeli society move towards. Torah U'Mad'a, Zionism, the centrality of Israel, all of these are the aspects of which my library is based on.
Bar-Ilan University is proud to confer the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa upon Mr. Isi Leibler.
להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון
I want to take you to Israel in pictures and film. I want you to see how God's sovereign hand can be seen before our eyes right here in this land. That's why PJTN is offering a special anniversary package that includes a captivating new book and award-winning DVD. Israel Rising is a unique visual story of Israel's miraculous journey from unforgiving desert to thriving nation. Thousands of years ago, the prophet Ezekiel foretold a future time in which the arid land of Israel would come alive for its people. Now this breathtaking book documents the fulfillment of this vision, as rarely seen photographs from the 1880s to the 1940s are juxtaposed with recent photos of the same locations. This book will inspire and captivate you as it illuminates Israel's foretold awakening in a new and unforgettable way. In addition, you'll receive the award-winning documentary, Israel Indivisible, The Case for the Ancient Homeland. This inspiring film examines the many political twists and turns that make Israel the world's most controversial nation. From Abraham and the Promise to the issues facing the Jewish state today, the film examines the historical, archaeological, legal, and biblical foundations for the modern state of Israel. This is a limited time offer for these two remarkable resources for just a one-time gift of $70 today. Your generous donation will help ensure that PJTN stays on the front lines and in the headlines of all the important issues facing Israel and our Jewish brethren. So please go to pjtn.org today. From studying history, it's very clear that what starts with the Jews never ends only with the Jews. We must strongly stand against any anti-Semitic trends, for if not stopped, they'll cause harm to all of us, and we'll witness the downfall of our Judeo-Christian Western culture. Today, many people say there's no longer a need for a Jewish state, that Jews around the world no longer need a place of refuge. But anyone who has heard recent statistics about the worldwide rise in anti-Semitism would never make such a claim. The reality is that neo-Nazi groups and Nazi sympathizers are increasing around the world. Surveys show that over 1 billion people in the world harbor anti-Semitic attitudes. Close to 50% believe that Jews have too much power in the business world, and 2/3 of the world's population has never heard of the Holocaust or believe the historic accounts of it are inaccurate. Don't let yourself be manipulated by evil people with a wicked agenda. When the self-serving villains are in control, good people from all religions suffer. Muslims, Christians, and all people of conscience should stand proudly and show respect for a country that gives so much to the world in so many ways. Do your part, do your research, and do what you can to make a difference. Because what happens in Israel does affect us all. This is not just a Jewish or just an Israeli problem. This is a problem for all humanity, for each and every one of us who believe in freedom and human rights. Learn more about what you can do at pjtn.org. In 1999, Dr. Liebler and his wife Naomi moved to Israel and settled in Jerusalem. He became the chairman of the governing board of the World Jewish Congress and served the organization until 2005. In 2007, he was appointed chairman of the Diaspora Commission at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a prominent research institute specializing in public diplomacy and foreign policy. While living in Australia, Liebler built one of the largest private libraries of Judaica in the world that he recently donated to Bar-Ilan University in Israel. He is also the author of numerous works on Jewish affairs, including Soviet Jewry and Human Rights and Jewish Religious Extremism, a threat to the future of the Jewish people. His writing has also included a weekly opinion column for the Jerusalem Post called Candidly Speaking. Dr. Liebler has become a close friend and an ardent supporter of PJTN. During a trip to Israel, we had the chance to sit with him in his office and discuss the many threats Israel is facing today.
The terrorism that we're experiencing now has two objectives. The first objective is to create an atmosphere of terror and instability within Israel itself. We'll overcome that, I have no doubt. The second one is more disconcerting because they are trying to create an atmosphere in which people from overseas will be frightened to come to Israel and will see Israel as a country which is a dangerous place. And it's in this context that it has to be looked at as an extension of BDS. And to that extent, I think it's very, very important that we combat it, and I'm hoping that friends of Israel will not be influenced and will continue coming. Because when the chips are down, as of now, you are still safer in Israel and even in Jerusalem than in most cities in Europe and in the rest of the world. BDS is basically a movement which is an attempt to isolate Israel and to use diplomatic and economic means by which to tear it apart and undo what they could not do to Israel militarily. And it is pernicious in the sense that double standards apply, moral relativism comes into it. It is an awful movement because if anything reflects anti-Semitism, it's the BDS movement, because Israel is singled out. And Israel is a unique country. It's like an oasis here in a sea of barbarism. And we are being kind of isolated by people who claim to be concerned about human rights. These people are turning towards Israel and ignoring the mayhem and the millions of people who have been displaced and killed around them and concentrating on the Jews. This, to me, is quite open anti-Semitism. The ridiculous thing about BDS is if it was practiced really, you know, the world wouldn't be able to operate. People would not be able to use computers. People would not be able to use half the medical things that come from Israel. It's nonsense. It is clearly an attempt to isolate areas in order to make Israel a pariah and in order to make Israel weak. My own view is that ultimately this is counterproductive not only to the countries that are doing it, but when you consider the Arabs who are living here, it harms them too. And believe me, the BDS movement has created problems for Arabs and employment and so forth. But they're not concerned about Arabs or anything. They're only concerned about one thing: try to undermine the state of Israel and Jewish sovereignty. That's the ultimate objective. When I hear the word apartheid applied to Israel, my blood boils, because I would challenge you to go into any Israeli hospital, to go into any Israeli mall, to go and look at the Supreme Court of Israel, look at the Parliament of Israel. You've got Arabs in all of those places, despite the fact that many of them are radicals and many of them are really saying bad things about their own country. And to use the expression apartheid, especially coming from people who have the most inhuman abuse of human rights in their own countries, to me is an abomination and reflects the hypocrisy of the world that stands by and puts equal blame, or more often concentrates all its ire on Israel, which is trying to live a life of peace and coexistence. Theoretically it's possible, but in terms of practice, what has happened with the Arabs is that since the time of Arafat, the Palestinians have been transformed into a culture of death, a culture which extols destruction and death, and a culture which is based on hating the Jews and refusing to accept the legitimacy of the Jewish state. That is ultimately their objective. And those people that imagine that this is a fight over real estate, that this is a fight over territories, they're wrong. The Arabs could have had a Palestinian state already many times in the past. And Ehud Olmert even foolishly offered them 95% of everything they wanted. And they still knocked it back. Why? Because their objective is not to have a Palestinian state. Their real objective is to see the demise of the Jewish state. And so long as we have duplicitous, corrupt creatures, that's the way I describe Abbas, in positions of power and continuing to control the education of a generation of kids to bring up this culture of death and destruction, I see no possibility of coming to any peace settlement. And we have to come to terms with trying to improve the position and the status of Arabs, Israelis, and bring us closer people to people, but forget about giving a Palestinian state, which would only be taken over anyway by the extremists. But I must say to you, the difference between the Palestinian administration and Hamas is one of strategy. It's not one of ideology. Both of them want to see the destruction of the State of Israel. Both engage in the worst forms of horrific anti-Semitism. So be under no illusions. One's not a nice guy, it's like the way we're put. And we have to go through this pantomime in order to make the world happy. We pretend that we're having discussions knowing that we're not going to get anywhere. We talk about our peace partner. He's no peace partner. He is a man who is committed to our destruction. And his time has nearly come, but whoever will replace him, if they're going to be the same, more of the same. So the answer to those that say, can we have an independent state next to us? In the immediate future, impossible with these people. Not until they have a dramatic change in their leadership, which is not on the horizon. I think there's one problem in the world today. They look upon us and the Palestinians as two people fighting one another. But when you look at the culture which is introduced from kindergarten stage, it's something which is so totally alien to a Western Christian Jewish civilization, they don't understand it, because these people are brought up with the ultimate objective in life. The greatest way of achieving sanctity is to kill Jews and to go to heaven as a result of doing that. Now they're taught to be martyrs, they're taught to be shaheeds from the kindergarten age. And from that point on, the media, the television, and everything pumps hatred and hatred and hatred and hatred into them. It is a culture of death. It is a monstrosity. And it is in many respects, there are many parallels between the Palestinians, who as people are not bad people, they're good people. But if you take the Palestinians under Arafat and all these other people that have educated them, it's like the Germans. The Germans were also transformed from being good people into monsters, and again, they're good people. I'm hoping that perhaps the day will come, maybe not in my life, but the day will come when there will be Arabs arising to become leaders that will bring about peace and overcome this hatred and come to terms with the fact that we are here to stay. We seem to be living in a world where we have become so intimidated that the moment we look at anything related to Islam, we are under attack for what is called Islamophobia. And that's nonsense, because what is really happening is that we are being pressured by Islamic extremists to adopt their standards, to move in their direction, and to not have the right to criticize them, despite the fact that some of the things they're doing are totally contrary to Western concepts, totally contrary to human dignity and to decency. This is one of the big problems that we face in the Western world, because people think that they're being liberal by being kind to these people. Well, it's like, to my mind, being kind to Nazis. When you have an element which is evil, you've got to stand up and fight it. One of the real problems the Jews and Christians have to work together with is to recognize the fact that much of the world today is engaged in moral relativism, and they see no distinction between good and bad, between good and evil. We are still believing that the world is made up of good people and bad people, and good people must fight bad people. Well, Sadat wanted to have peace with Israel, and he paid the price for it, because the extremists ultimately killed him. And I believe that that would apply to most leaders today in most parts of the Arab world. I have some hope that perhaps the Egyptian Sisi may move in the right direction, but he's doing it very carefully and very slowly, and the country still reeks of anti-Semitism and hatred of Jews, but at least we have objective interests in fighting terrorists together. So that brings us together. But to make real peace is a real challenge for any Arab leader, and he puts his life in peril. I think that in the Western world, and even in the United States, and particularly in the campuses, and it's even starting, I understand now, in the schools, textbooks are emerging which have been influenced by Islamic forces to distort reality. Now, this is something which is quite dangerous, because if this continues and children are brought up with a distorted view of the reality of the world and of the threats that the world face, it will have terrible consequences for us in the long term. And we should fight it and stand up and point out when these textbooks come out, point out if they are wrong, demand that they be corrected, and not allow influences from external influences to impose upon us alien ideas. One of the extraordinary developments which has taken place in the last 20 or 30 years is, as Israel lost the sympathy of the left and of liberals, we developed a closer rapport with Christians, particularly evangelicals. And to me, it's an extraordinary development, because in the past there was never quite, there were Christian Zionists, but there was never a mass movement of such love towards Jews, which is exhibited with genuine feelings. And I've had a lot of dealings with these people, have enormous respect for them, and I consider them extraordinarily important for the Jewish people and allies, and we are both. And what I'm happy about is it's one of the few Christian denominations which is growing and growing powerfully, whereas the others are shrinking. They have faced up to anti-Semitism in the past. They are trying to build up a relationship with the Jews, and they believe from Genesis that God will bless them if they are good to the Jews. Now, to me, this is not missionarizing. Needless to say, if there's missionaries, if there's an attempt to convert us, there would be enormous resistance to that. But the friendship that is shown by most of them is something that has to be extolled. I can tell you, and you could see in the streets, when we had the visits of the evangelicals here over tabernacles, the average Israeli appreciates them, loves them, and it gives an enormous strength and courage to know that we have support like that. To my mind, the Friends of Israel and the Christian movement are, in many respects, even in the United States, as important and sometimes more important than the Jewish lobby itself. And sometimes the passion they express and convey really warms me up, and I get a lot of letters from them, and I really do appreciate them. I've had dealings with them, and they're impeccable in their approach, and we're very, very fortunate to have such friends. I would today urge Americans to review the situation very, very carefully, and when they appoint their leaders, try to get back to a situation where they take responsibility for leadership of the world, because there's only one country which has the capacity, the strength, and the power of leading the world. That is the United States. And by withdrawing and creating all these vacuums and allowing evil people to come in and take over, that is why things have gone so bad. And I would hope that the next leader of America will go back to fundamentals and will lead the world, because that is America's role today, to play the position of leading the world and exerting influence for stability and peace in the world, linking up with its allies and distancing itself from rogue states instead of trying to engage or grovel towards them. That's what I would like to see the American people and its leaders move towards in the future.
That's our show for today, and I want you to know we appreciate hearing from you. Please send your comments and questions to comments@pjtn.org. The time to stand up is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your senators, congressmen. Let your elected leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more. Sign up to receive free action alerts and order our films to share with others. Please encourage your family and friends to tune in and watch. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. We'll see you next time on Focus on Israel.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you, and thank you for your support and prayers.
I will not rest. I will